What would happen if, from one moment to the next, the ozone layer ceased to exist? You leave the house and feel something strange in the air. The heat is unbearable. The once familiar sunlight now seems to cut through your skin like invisible blades. The sky is no longer the same blue. It glows strangely, almost distorted, as if something is wrong with the atmosphere itself. But this is just the beginning. Shadows disappear as the light becomes overwhelming. People around him protect themselves as best they can, but there is not enough shelter. Your eyes hurt, your skin burns. In a matter of minutes, the first signs appear. Severe burns, dizziness, a suffocating heat that seems to cook everything around. Time seems to run faster, as if the planet itself is collapsing. It sounds like a science fiction scenario. But what if I told you that could this already be happening? The ozone layer is slowly being destroyed, and the signs of this collapse are everywhere. In Hawaii, fires devastated entire cities within days, leaving a trail of destruction and suffocating heat. In Los Angeles, the sky turned into a smokescreen, with record temperatures and increasingly extreme weather. The entire planet is burning, and what were once rare events now happen with frightening frequency. Have you ever stopped to think that maybe we're not just heading towards this collapse, but have we already started living it? Comment below. Do you believe that the destruction of the ozone layer has already begun? Are we just seeing the first signs of something much bigger? But before drawing any conclusions, you need to know what would actually happen in the first 24 hours without the ozone layer. The effects are much worse than you imagine. The ozone layer forms in the stratosphere from the interaction between oxygen molecules and ultraviolet radiation from the sun. When sunlight hits the oxygen present in the atmosphere, it divides its molecules, which then recombine to form ozone. This process creates a barrier that absorbs most ultraviolet radiation before it reaches the Earth's surface. Without this layer, UV rays would hit the planet with full force, altering the chemistry of the atmosphere and compromising the survival of all known life forms. Ultraviolet radiation is invisible and can cause irreversible damage to human cells and would directly affect ecosystems, interfering with plant photosynthesis and harming microscopic organisms essential to the food chain. Plankton, the basis of marine life, would not withstand extreme exposure, compromising the balance of the oceans and affecting all terrestrial biodiversity. What many people don't realize is that this layer has been destroyed for decades. Substances such as chlorofluorocarbons, widely used in industry during the 20th century, were responsible for opening huge holes in the ozone layer. The best known of these emerged over Antarctica and reached frightening dimensions, allowing dangerous levels of radiation to pass through the atmosphere. International measures were taken to reduce the use of these compounds, but the damage was already done, and the recovery of this protective shield has been slow and uncertain. In addition to human action, natural events also contribute to the degradation of the ozone layer. Volcanic eruptions release gases that change the composition of the atmosphere, accelerating the destruction of ozone in certain regions. However, human activity remains the dominant factor. Increased pollution and deforestation compromise the regeneration of this layer, making it more vulnerable to new threats. The effects of ultraviolet radiation in the atmosphere are also felt in other ways. Particles present in the air react with UV rays, forming substances that increase the concentration of pollutants in the lower atmosphere. This can intensify extreme weather phenomena and contribute to unstable weather patterns, generating more intense heat waves and prolonged periods of drought. Depletion of the ozone layer is not just a future possibility. Recent data indicates that new sinkholes are emerging in different parts of the world, exposing entire populations to increasing levels of radiation. Regions close to the equator, where solar incidence is naturally stronger, may face even more serious consequences. What would happen if this destruction continued unchecked? What would life be like on a planet where ultraviolet radiation has no barriers? In the next few minutes, we will explore the immediate impacts of this catastrophe and understand why the first signs of this collapse are already appearing. Total destruction of the ozone layer would not allow time for adaptation. Once this barrier disappeared, ultraviolet radiation would invade the Earth's surface without any filter. In a matter of minutes, the first impacts would be felt. The air would appear drier and denser, as if it were charged with static electricity. The sunlight would no longer have that familiar golden glow. It would become aggressive, blinding, almost too white to bear with the naked eye. Anyone exposed directly to the sun without adequate protection would feel their skin burn within a few minutes. Sunburn cases would increase alarmingly. People exposed to the open air would begin to experience pain and redness in record time, as if they were close to an intense flame. But this wouldn't just be an uncomfortable feeling. Studies have already shown that without the ozone layer, UV radiation can penetrate deeper into the skin, reaching internal tissues and damaging cell DNA almost instantly. Skin cancer, which currently takes years to develop, could appear in weeks or even days, depending on continued exposure to radiation. Human vision would also suffer. Excessive ultraviolet light would damage eye cells quickly, increasing cases of temporary or permanent blindness. Animals with little natural protection against radiation, such as those with short coats or exposed skin, would be the first to feel the effects, developing burns and eye injuries in a short space of time. Temperatures would begin to rise rapidly. Without the ozone layer to balance incoming radiation, certain regions could experience sudden increases in heat, leading to record single-day temperatures. Cities already suffering from heat waves would reach even more extreme levels, making outdoor living impossible without adequate protection. At the same time, the upper layers of the atmosphere would begin to cool abnormally, destabilizing wind currents and changing weather patterns in unpredictable ways. But the impacts would not stop there. With solar radiation passing through the atmosphere without resistance, electrical and communication systems would suffer severe interference. Satellites, which are already vulnerable to solar storms, could be damaged quickly, resulting in signal transmission failures and affecting global communication. Telephone, internet, and even GPS networks could go down, leaving millions of people without connection. Planes would face difficulties in maintaining safe navigation, as their systems depend on satellite signals and radiation-sensitive electronic equipment. Agriculture would also feel the effects within the first 24 hours. Plants exposed to direct sunlight would begin to undergo mutations and structural damage to their cells, compromising their growth and leading to the loss of entire crops in a matter of days. Some crops that are more sensitive to light, such as green leaves and exposed fruit, could begin to wilt and rot quickly due to excess radiation. And while these impacts reach the surface, an even more dangerous transformation would be happening in the atmosphere. The gases present in the air would react with ultraviolet radiation differently than normal, triggering unpredictable chemical reactions. Air quality could worsen drastically with the formation of toxic compounds that would further increase the risks to human and animal health. What we are describing is not a distant possibility. Small gaps in the ozone layer have already caused significant increases in ultraviolet radiation in some regions. Now imagine this happening on a global scale with no chance of reversal. If the collapse of the ozone layer in a single day would already cause this level of destruction, what would happen to the planet's climate in the long term? Would the atmosphere be able to recover, or would we be heading towards a point of no return? In the next few minutes, we'll explore how Earth's climate balance would be affected and why the changes could be much more drastic than previously imagined. Now imagine for a moment that everything you believe about the safety and stability of the planet could be just an illusion. You grew up hearing that the Earth has natural defenses, that the atmosphere protects us, that life follows a balance. But what if that balance is already breaking down? What if the first signs of this collapse are already happening and no one is paying attention? Few people truly understand what it would mean to lose the ozone layer, and even fewer realize that. What we're discussing here is not just a hypothetical scenario, but a real possibility. Knowledge about this cannot be ignored. Every time this type of information circulates, more people wake up to what could be coming. So, if you believe that content like this needs to be seen by more people, leave a like. It doesn't change the facts, but it can ensure that more people have access to them before it's too late. Now that you've seen the immediate impact that depletion of the ozone layer would cause, think about what would happen to the global climate. Extreme heat would be just the beginning. Entire weather systems would collapse, and the long-term effects could be irreversible. But how far would that go? Would the planet support this transformation? Or would we be condemned to a completely hostile environment? The answer may be even more worrying than you imagine. Without the ozone layer to filter ultraviolet radiation, the atmosphere would enter a state of instability that would completely change the planet's weather patterns. Global warming, already a growing concern, would spiral out of control. Areas that currently have a temperate climate would suffer from desert temperatures during the day and abrupt cooling at night, making adapting to life in these places almost impossible. Cloud formation would also be impacted. Intense solar radiation could alter water evaporation and condensation cycles, making it difficult for regular rain to form. In some regions, this would mean prolonged periods of drought, compromising crops and drinking water reserves. In others, violent storms would become increasingly frequent as the atmosphere, upon losing its stability, would begin to generate extreme phenomena more easily. Hot and cold air masses would behave unpredictably. Wind systems, like those that control hurricanes and tropical storms, could undergo drastic changes. This means that more destructive cyclones could appear in places where they had never been recorded before, surprising entire populations without any structure to face them. Some regions could suffer from heat waves so intense that they would make living outdoors impossible, while others would experience abnormally harsh winters, with snowstorms in places that had never previously faced this type of phenomenon. The destruction of the ozone layer would also influence global atmospheric circulation. The intense heat in the lower layers of the atmosphere could alter the air currents that regulate the planet's climate. This could even affect the oceans, as winds play an essential role in moving sea currents. Changes in these currents could completely transform climate patterns on a global scale, making some areas uninhabitable due to extreme heat, while others would suffer from unexpected and unprecedented weather events. On a planet where the climate no longer follows predictable patterns, impacts would become a constant threat. Imagine living without knowing if tomorrow your city will be hit by a hurricane, an out-of-control fire, or a devastating dry spell. The concept of seasons as we know it would cease to exist, giving way to permanent climate chaos. Without the ozone layer, the human body would begin to undergo transformations that would go beyond what most people imagine. Continued exposure to UV radiation would cause direct damage to the immune system, making even common infections potentially fatal. Human DNA would undergo mutations on a scale never seen before, which could generate new diseases and genetic syndromes in just a few generations. The aging process itself could be accelerated, with irreversible cellular damage leading to a drastic reduction in life expectancy. The need to protect oneself from radiation would completely change humanity's lifestyle. The concept of outdoor living would cease to exist as we know it. Entire cities would need to be redesigned to minimize sun exposure. Buildings would be connected by underground tunnels, and open-air streets would become unviable during the day. Once prosperous regions could be abandoned due to extreme conditions, leading to a global migration crisis. Food would also be affected. With drastic changes in the climate and the degradation of crops due to radiation, food production would be compromised. Scarcity of resources would cause food prices to skyrocket, leading to the collapse of entire economies. Some nations would go to war for control of fertile land and water reserves, transforming the fight for survival into a new type of global conflict. In the long term, adaptation to the new environment would force humanity to develop technologies to live in conditions of extreme isolation. Protective domes, underground cities, and sealed refuges would become the only alternative to guarantee survival. But would we live like this forever? Humanity has always considered itself in control of its own destiny. We build cities, we develop technologies, we expand our dominion over the planet. But what if, in fact, we had never truly been the masters of our own survival? What if everything that keeps us alive was hanging by a thread, and no one was looking for the signs? Now imagine a world where every daily choice needs to be made based on fear, where leaving home without protection is a real risk, where cities need to be redesigned to avoid exposure to the external environment. Can you imagine what it would be like to live like this? What would you do to survive on a planet where the very air we breathe has become an invisible enemy? Comment below. Do you think humanity would be able to adapt to this new reality, or would we be doomed to extinction? What would be the solutions for a world without radiation protection? I want to know your opinion on this scenario. But if the destruction of the ozone layer would completely transform human life, what would happen to the ecosystems that sustain the Earth? The impact on the oceans and animals could be even more cruel and unpredictable than anything we've seen before. And what may emerge from this collapse is something that no one is prepared to face. Without the ozone layer, the oceans would become a hostile environment for life. Ultraviolet radiation would penetrate the waters with an intensity never before seen, directly reaching the plankton, the microscopic organism responsible for sustaining the entire marine food chain. Without it, collapse would be inevitable. Small fish, which depend on plankton as their primary food source, would die quickly. This would trigger a cascade effect, reaching everything from entire schools to gigantic species such as sharks and whales. In a short time, the ocean, which has always been one of the greatest regulators of life on the planet, would enter a state of irreversible collapse. But the damage would not be limited to the depths. Extreme heat and altered evaporation cycles would cause the oceans to lose more and more water to the atmosphere, intensifying storms and making the seas more acidic. Marine life, already weakened by food shortages, would be forced to fight against unstable and lethal environmental conditions. In forests, the impact would be equally devastating. Radiation would affect the DNA of plants, making them less resistant and compromising their ability to grow. Trees not adapted to high levels of radiation would begin to die, leading to accelerated degradation of tropical and boreal forests. Without vegetation to sustain terrestrial ecosystems, entire species would go extinct, taking predators and prey with them, triggering the collapse of biodiversity on a global scale. If the natural cycle of life were disrupted in this way, Earth could be heading towards something even darker. With the destruction of ecosystems, the impacts on the planet's atmosphere and chemical composition could trigger even more profound changes, transforming the Earth into an environment completely different from the one we know. But was there a way to avoid this fate? Some scientists believe there are solutions, but would they really work? Let's know this now. Faced with an extreme scenario like this, humanity would have no choice but to try to develop technological solutions to contain the destruction. One of the first measures would be the creation of artificial atmospheric shields. Scientists are already discussing the possibility of releasing reflective particles into the stratosphere, capable of blocking part of the ultraviolet radiation before it reaches the surface. This technology, known as solar geoengineering, works as a simulation of the ozone layer itself, but its effectiveness and possible side effects are still highly uncertain. Another alternative would be the construction of underground cities or climate-controlled domes, designed to completely isolate human life from the external environment. These refugees could maintain a controlled atmosphere, protecting inhabitants from radiation and extreme temperatures. However, the viability of this project is one of the biggest challenges. Keeping millions of people in a closed system would require immense amounts of energy and natural resources that would already be in short supply due to environmental collapse. Furthermore, prolonged confinement could have devastating psychological impacts, creating a new society based on isolation and the fight for survival. There is also the idea of trying to rebuild the ozone layer artificially. Some researchers speculate that chemical substances could be injected into the atmosphere to stimulate the formation of ozone, restoring, at least partially, the planet's natural protection. But this process would not be immediate. It would take decades to produce visible effects, and the cost would be astronomical. Furthermore, the interaction of these substances with other elements present in the atmosphere could generate unexpected reactions, bringing unpredictable consequences to the global climate. Most people can't even imagine how fragile our existence on the planet is. As we go about our routines, we trust in the stability of the Earth without realizing that everything can change in an instant. But you are not part of the majority. You are here because you seek to understand what few even question. And there is something that only a select group of curious minds understand. The more we discuss these scenarios, the more prepared we are for what the future may hold for us. This knowledge cannot be restricted, so share this video now and bring more people into this conversation. Let's spread this discussion before it's too late. But what if we are already seeing signs that this collapse could happen? Some evidence suggests that ozone depletion may be accelerating in ways we don't yet fully understand. What do scientists know but have not yet revealed? You may be about to discover something that will change your outlook on the future. If none of these solutions were viable, humanity would have to face an even more extreme reality: the need to abandon the planet's surface or ultimately seek refuge outside the Earth. But will we one day be forced to consider this option? The idea that the ozone layer is recovering may not be as safe as it seems. Although the hole over Antarctica has shrunk in recent years, new studies indicate that this recovery may be at risk. Recently, scientists detected an unexpected increase in chemical substances in the stratosphere that could compromise this process. Some of these substances were not even considered a threat a few decades ago, but are now being studied as potential agents in ozone destruction. Furthermore, there is another even more worrying problem: the illegal emission of banned compounds. Researchers identified that even after the ban on CFCs, certain regions of the world continue to release gases that affect the ozone layer. Some of these emissions have been traced to industries that circumvent environmental regulations, putting at risk a balance that took years to begin to restore. Another factor that few discuss is the impact of new technologies and space exploration. Some research suggests that certain pollutants released by rockets and experiments into the upper atmosphere may be contributing to the fragility of the ozone layer. With the increase in space missions and the growing industrialization of the stratosphere, we still do not know the long-term effects that these activities can cause. If these problems are not controlled now, is the destruction of the ozone layer just a matter of time? Would we have a way to prevent this collapse from happening? Some experts believe there are still possible solutions, but they may require sacrifices that humanity may not be willing to make. Depletion of the ozone layer is not a distant or unlikely scenario. With each new study, it becomes clearer that the Earth's stability is fragile, and our interference can trigger changes that are beyond our control. We have already seen what small disruptions in this balance can cause. Now, the big question is not whether this can happen, but whether, when, and if we still have time to avoid the worst. Humanity has always believed that it would have time to react, that science would find solutions before the point of no return. But what if this confidence is just an illusion? What if we are closer to this collapse than we imagine? The future can be decided now, and this conversation needs to continue. Do you think we could survive without the ozone layer? What would we do when faced with a planet that becomes hostile before our eyes? Comment below and bring your views to this discussion. There are secrets about the universe that have not yet been completely revealed. Being part of this is more than watching videos. It's embarking on a journey through theories and discoveries that challenge everything we know about reality. Here, each mystery leads to new questions. Each discovery takes you beyond what the eyes can see. Don't miss what's coming. What you just saw is just the beginning. The next revelation could change everything. If this has already left you intrigued, wait until you see what comes next. Some answers lead to even more mysterious questions. Get ready for the next video, where a new theory could challenge everything we know about the cosmos.